sweet love songs, and good old rock and roll. Welcome again to Teen Idols Week, our look at the pop stars who provided the soundtrack for an era. Tonight, Brenda Lee, a sensation before she was old enough to drive. Brenda Lee is currently on tour, captivating audiences with her classic song, Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, and all of her other hits. Many of Brenda Lee's fans agree with what former Beatle John Lennon once called her, the greatest rock and roll voice of them all.
Miss Brenda Lee to sing her new record, Dynamite.
Hey baby, when you kiss it.
I opened my door one night, and there she stood, 4'9", and I was really impressed. I thought, here is a musical icon. Here is the queen of rock and roll.
She started singing when she was 3 years old, and by the time she was 12 had appeared at the Grand Ole Opry.
I think Brenda Lee is truly a legend. We walk along hand in hand.
That jump, that jive, that energy, and all those little tricks that Brenda has, the hiccuping, the little break in the voice, all those things are real characteristic of what rockabilly singers do.
With her phenomenal voice and her passionate delivery, Brenda Lee sang her way from childhood poverty to international stardom.
She was just this little girl with a great big personality and just a great big heart.
She has so much energy from when she was 6 years old to present day.
Just at a time when the steam ran out of her rock and roll career, she cranked up her country music career.
Bottom line, Brenda Lee's one of the greatest female talents that's ever sung a note of music.
Later we'll have some pumpkin pie and we'll do some caroling.
In the early 1940s, the United States was in the throes of the Second World War. The country's resources had been diverted to support the war effort, and jobs were hard to come by in the rural South. When Reuben Tarpley finished his final tour of duty in the Army, he returned to his wife Grace and their daughter Linda in the small town of Lithonia, Georgia. A carpenter by trade, Reuben moved his wife and daughter from town to town looking for work. Eventually, they settled in Atlanta, where they hoped there would be enough work to go around. On December 11th, 1944, Reuben and Grace Tarpley welcomed their second child, Brenda May. Brenda May was born in the charity ward of an Atlanta hospital because Reuben did not have the money to pay for a regular room. At birth, Brenda weighed only 4 pounds. She was small, but she was a fighter. Brenda's dad ended up working in a cotton mill. The Tarpley family always had food and a roof over their heads, but it was a constant struggle to make ends meet. Treats for the Tarpley children were rare.
Every Friday when he came home from work, he would bring each of us children a little, it was about this tall, we call them kits. It was like taffy, 4 little pieces of taffy, and that's the only candy that we ever got.
Brenda's mother also worked full-time at the cotton mill, but still managed to find time to spend with her daughters. In her few spare moments, Grace Tarpley would sit Brenda on her knee and sing her songs by Hank Williams and Nat King Cole. One of the first songs Brenda learned to sing was a tearful ballad by Eddie Arnold called My Daddy Is Only a Picture. The Tarpleys were also a church-going family. Listening to the moving and impassioned songs of the choir, Brenda fell in love with gospel music.
I grew up with the old Southern gospel, of course, going to church as a child. I loved Mahalia Jackson. She was absolutely one of my very favorite people and entertainers and singers in the whole wide world.
From the time she was a baby, she'd surprised her parents listening intently to any radio that was near and imitating the sounds that came from them.
She was like a Mozart, somebody who just sprang seemingly with her gift in full array before she could even coherently speak. You know, as soon as she could make noise, she could sing.
When Brenda was 3 years old, her older sister Linda entered her in a beauty and talent contest.
The first song that I actually sung in public was, I did a talent show when I was 3 years old, going on 4. I did 2 songs. I did Slowpoke, and I did a Nat King Cole song. You got money if you won beauty. I was vying for the money, but I didn't win the beauty part. I lost out to an 18-month-old baby. But I won the talent, and I got a big box of King Edward peppermint sticks. And until this day, I will not eat them.
Though Brenda was disappointed with the result, the experience made one thing clear. Brenda was a natural performer. From that day on, Brenda sang whenever she could find an audience. Her dad would bring her to his work league baseball games, where she would proudly sing the national anthem. Brenda's father told her that someday she was going to be a star, and yet he had a feeling he would never live to see it. News of Brenda's talent spread quickly, and it wasn't long before local radio and television shows started inviting her to perform.
There was a disc jockey down in the Chattanooga area, Peanuts Faircloth, who put her on some early shows, and her reputation grew as this little bitty tyke who had such a big booming voice.
When she was 6 years old, Brenda got her first paying job as a performer. She sang at a local Shriners Club luncheon and was paid $20. Since the birth of her brother Randall, the Tarpleys needed the money more than ever, but no one could imagine just how much Brenda's talent and voice would mean to the survival of her family. When she was only 8 years old, a freak accident on a construction site changed their lives forever. A hammer, dropped from the scaffolding above, struck Reuben Tarpley on the head. After lapsing into a coma, he died 1 week later. Brenda never got to say goodbye to her beloved father.
She didn't talk about the death of her father very much. I think it was really so painful for her.
She adored her father. She really regretted she wasn't able to have any more time with him than she did through the years.
Grace Tarpley's life now became a constant struggle to make ends meet. Her small income was simply not enough to feed and clothe her 3 children.
We're talking really poor, not just, people say, oh, I grew up poor. No, we're talking dirt poor. We're talking trailer park. We're talking really depressingly poor.
Plunged into desperate poverty, Brenda and her mom worked day and night finding Brenda as many singing jobs as possible. Brenda would become the major breadwinner of her family, even though she was only 8 years old.
You are watching Brenda Lee, part of Teen Idol's Week on Biography.
Years old, Brenda Lee had been amazing audiences with her phenomenal voice. But with the tragic death of her father, Brenda's family had to struggle financially. Brenda's singing voice became the family's way to escape poverty.
When my father died, my mom was working pretty long hours in a cotton mill, and I was working various little places around Georgia, and I was getting some money. So I was helping my mom to support the family.
Desperate to hold her family together, Brenda's mother moved the children back to her hometown of Lithonia, Georgia. With an extended family to care for the other 2 children, her mom devoted more time to finding Brenda as many singing jobs as possible. In early 1955, Brenda's mother met a man named Jay Rainwater in Augusta. They were married just 6 months later. Although she deeply missed her father, Brenda was happy that her mother had met someone else. Rainwater, 13 years younger than Grace, was a drinker who had little interest in Brenda or her siblings. Even with her personal life in turmoil, Brenda didn't take a break. She continued to work.
She never felt she had a childhood or was a child. Other people will tell you that about her, from producers to friends. Brenda, you were never a child.
Brenda got the chance to appear on WJAT-TV's Peach Blossom Special. The show's director, Sammy Barton, shortened Brenda's name to Brenda Lee, saying it would be easier to remember when she became famous. Trading on Brenda's local popularity, her stepfather opened a record store, which he called the Brenda Lee Record Shop. Brenda dutifully sang there each week. In the music store, Brenda was thrilled to have access to a record player. She began to listen to the people who would become major musical influences in her life, like Edith Piaf, Billie Holiday, and Judy Garland. Brenda was happy. Local radio station WRDW and DJ Peanuts Faircloth picked up on Brenda's popularity, and she began to perform on a weekly radio show.
When Brenda Lee came on the radio, people were talking about she is just 10 years old, she is young, and she is this, but boy, could she ever sing. And of course, I wanted to be a star myself, and so I would listen to all her records, and I used to perform her songs too on some of the local shows. And I have a brother that was always the mean one. He was like about a year and a half, 2 years older than me, and he'd say, "You damn sure ain't no Brenda Lee." And it's like, and I said, "I know I'm not, but I wish I was as good as Brenda Lee."
Brenda's big break came in 1955 at the tender age of 10, when Peanuts Faircloth got Brenda an audition with popular country and western band leader Red Foley. Foley immediately put Brenda on the television show The Junior Jamboree, a children's version of his popular weekly show The Ozark Jubilee. Leaving the other children behind, Brenda and her mom would get on a bus, travel all night to Springfield, Missouri, rehearse, film the show, then get back on the bus again for the long ride back to Augusta, Georgia. Both Brenda and her mother were perpetually exhausted. But the hard work paid off. Brenda became an overnight sensation when she sang a Hank Williams song her mother had taught her. The song was Jambalaya.
Well, goodbye, Joe. Me gotta go, me on my own. Well, me gotta go for the hero down the bayou. Well, my father's sweetest one, me on my own. Well, son of a gun with a big one on the bayou.
Even though young Brenda was becoming the talk of country and western music, finding her a recording contract was not easy. Many of the label executives were reluctant to sign a child, but Red Foley persuaded Decca recording executives to take a chance on Brenda. And in 1956, Brenda signed her first recording contract. Decca executives put Brenda to work right away. From the start of her very first recording session, 11-year-old Brenda Lee proved herself to be a consummate professional.
Bobby Moore, the bass player, played a flat note. And she, being a little kid, they didn't intimidate her, though they were the best musicians around. She said, she said, "The bass was flat." And Bobby Moore said, "It was not." She said, "Play it back." And Bobby Moore was wrong. He was flat.
Little Brenda earned the immediate respect of her fellow musicians. Soon they dubbed her Little Miss Dynamite, after a particularly explosive performance.
Dynamite. Hey, baby, when you kiss it, dynamite. Hey, baby, when you hug and hold me tight, I just explode like dynamite. Dynamite. If I might do all the things I love.
In many ways, it sums it up. You know, she had this explosively energetic performing style, particularly on the up-tempo stuff, and she was little. And it's like, it's perfect.
Early in 1957, Brenda's mother gave birth to her fourth child, Robin. In order to give Brenda a chance at a career, the family moved to the mecca of country and western music, Nashville. Nashville was the home of the Grand Ole Opry and performers like Hank Williams and Jerry Lee Lewis. Red Foley's manager, Doug Albritton, was a powerhouse in Nashville, and he took the little girl under his wing.
Brenda grew up in a rural community and had never been anywhere much and was not very sophisticated. Dub not only was her manager, he was her mentor. And he taught her how to walk and what to wear, how to talk to people.
Here's a guy from a restaurant family in Paducah who takes this kid and makes her a star. It was just amazing what he did, and all this sophistication and class that he gave her. She was just a little redneck from Georgia, and he put her in the spotlight in these gowns and made her this sophisticated chanteuse, and it's like, where the heck did that come from? How did he learn that?
Dub also filled a void in Brenda's young life. He became a much-loved father figure.
I think his integrity, the way he did business, and the love that he had for the business, I think he instilled a lot of that into Brenda.
With Dub at the helm, Brenda's career took off with a string of impressive accomplishments. Impressive for a performer of any age. She made her first appearance at the Grand Ole Opry at the age of 12. She played the Las Vegas Strip shortly thereafter. She toured the country with heavyweights like Mel Tillis, George Jones, and the legendary Patsy Cline. Away from their homes for weeks at a time, the singers developed an unlikely relationship, with Cline acting as a big sister.
On the face of it, you would think that an old salty broad like Patsy Cline and a young innocent kid like Brenda would not be close. But I think Brenda just worshipped Patsy. Patsy took care of her when they were on the road together. They didn't have road managers and junk like that back in those days. You went out there and you took care of your own bad self.
Brenda Lee had devoted her entire childhood to her career. She was on national television, had recorded several country and western albums, but Brenda still did not have a hit record. And it was not country and western, but a rock and roll song that would catapult her to stardom.
You are watching Teen Idols Week here on Biography.
Had spent most of her childhood performing in order to support her family. She had an incredible voice and an amazing stage presence. What was missing was a hit record that would really make her a star. Late in 1957, her manager, Dub Albritton, combined Brenda with legendary Nashville record producer Owen Bradley.
Owen Bradley really is, for all of us who work here in Nashville, he is our father. He was the man who made it possible for us to have an industry here.
There was an instant connection between the little girl and Owen. Brenda found a second father figure in her life.
Owen just understood singers and the female singers so innately. I really think that probably Brenda was his baby in so many ways.
He was my mentor, but he was also like a father to me. He was a part of my family.
And he put her with the A-Team, the original musicians who created the Nashville sound. And there was a certain kind of magic there.
At first, Owen Bradley had Brenda record songs like Bill Bailey, Won't You Please Come Home. But Bradley and Albritton knew that this little girl's voice could capture an audience. And there was a new music on the rise that matched Brenda's voice and spirit perfectly. Rock and roll.
Rock and roll revolution came along in the mid-50s. And that was mainly male-dominated. It was the Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis and all these cats. But there were a few women in there. And the interesting thing about them is, Brenda among them, is that they actually were teenagers when they were recording this music, and their male counterparts were not. They were young, spunky girls who got into this rhythm, this pattern, this rockabilly thing with that energy and fire and drive that the men had, and that was so striking and so unusual. And that's why I really think of her as a real pioneer in the rock and roll revolution.
In September of 1959, 14-year-old Brenda Lee recorded Sweet Nothings, and the world of music was rocked on its heels. The song shot to number 4 on the Billboard charts and was Brenda's first international hit.
We walk along hand in hand. Sweet nothing.
She's only a kid, but she's sounding like a sexy little gal, you know, who's dating and stuff. She's not even old enough to date yet when she's recording that stuff.
Sweet Nothings was Brenda's first crossover into the world of rock and roll. It sold millions of copies. It also made her part of the elite rock and roll in crowd of Jerry Lee Lewis, the Everly Brothers, and the great Elvis Presley.
Elvis loved Sweet Nothings and wanted her to autograph a copy, so he called her. And you can see why it was Elvis Presley's favorite record. I mean, it's just a real catchy little cha-cha. And it was her first really big hit.
To capitalize on the teen music market, Dub Albritton teamed Brenda with a hip young rock and roll band, the Casuals.
Brenda! Dub Albritton chose the Casuals because of the teenage image. That we had such respect for her, and we knew that the audiences in the industry did too.
Though she had gained national rock and roll celebrity, touring in the late 50s and early 60s was not easy for a teenaged girl.
When I first went on the road with Brenda, she would sleep coming back from the little gigs we did in Georgia and Tennessee, piled up on clothes in the back of Dub's car.
Back in those days, performers didn't make the kind of money they make today. Not even close. I mean, and you worked for your bucks. You worked the road constantly. It was a never-ending grind, and just to stay afloat in the pop music world at the time.
The touring and traveling would have caused stress in any normal teenager's life. But Brenda still managed to be a force to be reckoned with at Maplewood High in Nashville.
She came into Maplewood and just, claimed her spot. She just claimed her territory, and everyone loved her. Everyone loved her.
Brenda even tried out for cheerleading.
When it was time for cheerleading tryouts, Brenda, of course, tried out and won on her own merit. She could jump and scream louder than anybody.
And Brenda brought her band to perform for the kids in her class.
And she were cheerleaders together there, and we came over and kind of rocked the house up and had a great time.
Brenda's brilliant musical performances gave no indication of her troubled family life. She always put on a brave face at school.
You would never have known that there was a lot of trouble going on deep inside the family, because she always smiled, she always made people laugh.
In 1959, Brenda's stepfather abandoned the family, leaving Grace and her children with no money. Once again, Brenda found herself supporting her mother and her brother and sisters. Because of a law protecting child performers from losing their earnings to their parents, Brenda's money had been put into a trust until she was 21. Brenda and her family were forced to move into a trailer park.
Brenda moved here and went before Judge Beverly Briley. He allocated $75 a month to Brenda's mother to support in a trailer park Brenda, her half-sister, her sister, and her brother, and the mother. 5 people on $75 a month.
It was not a great place to live. And she was always calling our house and, you know, saying, oh, crying, say, could you all come and get me and come pick me up? And I want to come to your house. And she did. She spent an awful lot of time at our house. And, you know, I think things at home were not real happy for her at that time.
Even as her family life was threatening to overwhelm her, 1960 turned into an incredible year for 15-year-old Brenda Lee. She recorded her biggest hit to date, I'm Sorry, a torrid, tearful ballad that belied young Brenda's true age.
That I was such a fool. I did know love could be so cruel.
The recording company liked the song, but they didn't think that I was old enough to be singing the songs.
She was little and she was young and she couldn't possibly have lived all the stuff she made you believe that she had, or you wouldn't want to believe that she'd had that hard a time. But you really felt the emotion, you felt the depth of it, you felt everything that she said, you believed it.
I'm Sorry shot to #1 in the summer of 1960, beating out Roy Orbison's Only the Lonely. It stayed in the top 100 of the Billboard charts for over 6 months and won both a gold record and a Grammy nomination. Brenda's music was now popular all over the world, and Dub Allbritton saw to it that she toured the globe.
He takes this kid around the world because she becomes one of the first true international teen pop stars. But an international star in Japan, in Germany, in England, Australia.
But Brenda's mature voice created confusion and some sensational press in France.
We had sent publicity pictures for the paper to use, and we kept getting these letters back saying, send more recent pictures. And because they had never seen me, they had just heard me. So they thought that I was older, much older, and that we were lying.
A story got out in the French press that she was actually a 35-year-old American midget. And then Brenda and I we were talking about that and laughing about it one day, and Brenda said, you know, I think Dub planted that story.
Brenda Lee was now an international star. She traveled the world and had hit the top of the Billboard charts. But unbelievably, with her money tied up in a trust fund because of her age, 17-year-old Brenda Lee and her family were anything but rich.
Biography.com wants to hear from you. Which of these is your favorite Brenda Lee song?
Let me down the easy way. Make me
Visit Biography.com and vote now.
Brenda Lee had been at the top of the charts for 2 solid years. With a Grammy nomination for I'm Sorry and a gold record, Brenda decided it was time to get her family out of the trailer park.
When I had I'm Sorry, I was living in a trailer, and not a very nice trailer at that, and not under really good circumstances. I told my guardian, I said, I would love to buy my mom a home. And so he said, well, let's go to the judge and see what we can do. And so we went to the judge, we presented it to him, and he agreed, and I bought my mom a home, and it was great, and she loved it, and it fulfilled a dream of mine.
In addition to fulfilling her mother's dreams, Brenda also had dreams of her own. Like other teenaged girls in America, she wanted to meet a boy, but her mother and her manager were very protective.
I really wasn't allowed to date. I was allowed to go to parties. My mom would take me and pick me up. I actually did go out on a date with Fabian, if you could call it a date. We're walking down Riverwalk. I kept hearing things behind me, and I look back, and all of a sudden behind a shrub I see my manager, and he jumps back behind it thinking I didn't see him. They were all following us to make sure that everything went right and that nothing happened, and I wanted something to happen.
And I met at a Jackie Wilson concert, which was a little bit unlikely for me because I wasn't into music that much.
I see this great looking guy sitting over there, and I thought, gosh, you know, he looks pretty good. And I was 17, I guess, and one of my girlfriends said, oh, I know him. He's with some guys that I know. And I said, that's great. I said, if I write a note, would you take it over there to him? She said, surely you're not going to do that. And I said, I am. So I wrote a note, and I said, hi, my name is Brenda. Here's my telephone number. I'd like for you to call me. And then after I did it, I thought, you know what, that is really forward. You know, he might not take to that too much. I don't even know this guy. So I waited a good, I think it was almost a month. He says it was about 2 weeks, but he did finally call.
It was love at first sight. 7 months after they met, against the wishes of both her mother and manager, Brenda and Ronnie were married.
When Brenda married Ronnie, the tallest guy in Nashville, and she was the shortest girl in Nashville, we all thought it was really funny.
Deeply in love, newlyweds Ronnie and Brenda were not financially on Easy Street. At 18, Brenda was still considered a minor by the courts, and she was denied access to her money. Just back from their honeymoon, Brenda went out on the road to perform, and Ronnie went to work to support his new wife.
He's very talented. He's one of those guys that can just do almost anything.
In 1962, newlywed Brenda hit the charts with yet another gold record, Break It To Me Gently.
Break it to me gently. Let me down the easy way. Make me feel that you still love me. If it's just for one more day. Break it to me gently.
Break It To Me Gently seemed to underscore the emotional trials that would soon come Brenda's way. In 1963, Brenda's dear friend Patsy Cline was killed in a tragic airplane crash. Patsy had taken care of young Brenda when they were on the road together and taught her how to survive in the music industry. Brenda had lost a great friend. Soon after her good friend's death, Brenda was comforted by the joyful news that she was pregnant. But the birth of Brenda and Ronnie's first daughter was very traumatic. The baby was born more than 2 months premature and was diagnosed with hyaline membrane disease, which affected her lungs. The baby was not expected to live. Brenda and Ronnie appealed to Dr. Mildred Stallman, the pediatrician who attended the births of President Kennedy's children, to come to Nashville. Her expert care saved their baby's life.
We were children ourselves, you know, really. As you look back, I think about that.
There are rumors
It was 1964, and the music industry was undergoing tremendous change. The Beatles swept into North America and took over the airwaves. A new swinging London image was all the rage. Brenda found herself out of fashion.
The American teen idols, most of them were history when the British invasion happened. A whole generation of acts went under.
Brenda took to the road, wisely capitalizing on her fame in France, Germany, England, and Japan.
You don't hear any Japanese folk song yet?
Not yet, but I'd like to. We had built up that road work, and we had built up our international audience, and we were working over there too, so I never felt that lack of work or lack of recording or lack of hits. I wasn't having as many hit records, yes, now that's true. I wasn't having #1s all the time. I wasn't even having top 10s, you know, but I think that happens to all of us.
Brenda sang in German, in Japanese, and even performed for the Queen of England.
She was told she couldn't touch the Queen, and she had to have gloves. So Brenda said, we have to have gloves. And Dub said, well, we don't have any gloves. And so Dub ran around and finally found a dancer who had these long gloves on. Brenda said they came up to her shoulders, but she wore them.
In 1969, to Brenda and Ronnie's joy, Brenda gave birth to a second daughter, Jolie. Brenda was a devoted and proud mother who loved to be with her children whenever she could.
She would have me stand up on the chair at the club and say, this is my daughter, and I'm 2 years old. She made a point, even though we traveled with her, she would be at our school, and in town she wasn't Brenda Lee, she was Julie's mom, and she was volunteering at the spaghetti supper.
Brenda was able to keep working and tour the world because of the unwavering support from her husband, Ronnie.
When we were little, he was Mr. Mom. Of course, he had his own business, but he was at home with us. I mean, she traveled extensively, and he had to juggle a lot of things and take care of us and make sure we had a stable home.
One way that Ronnie took care of Brenda was to make sure that her money was well handled.
I think that the key thing he provided was a real sense of don't live above your means kind of thing. They never spent their money.
Brenda Lee was thrilled with her home life, but the world of music, the industry that had sustained her for so many years, was threatening to leave her behind. At 29, Brenda's 20 years of touring would catch up to her, and illness would threaten her life. Depressed and physically depleted, Brenda Lee would return to her country roots for salvation.
You are watching Brenda Lee, part of Teen Idol's Week on Biography.
In the late 1950s, she'd successfully transformed herself into a rock and roll star with hits like Sweet Nothings and I'm Sorry. But now, 20 years later, music was changing. Rock and roll was dominated by the driving beats of groups like the Rolling Stones. Brenda was searching to find her place. To compound the emotional and physical stress of life on the road, Brenda's longtime manager and adored surrogate father, Dub Albritton, died in 1971.
His main focus in life was me for all those years, and I appreciate that so much, and I miss him terribly.
Reeling from the loss, Brenda was physically exhausted. 20 years on the road had taken its toll. In 1974, while driving to meet Owen Bradley at Nashville's Music Row, Brenda began to suffer excruciating leg pain. She was rushed to the hospital, where the doctors discovered a blood clot blocking the artery to her heart. Brenda was not expected to live through the night, but she underwent emergency surgery that saved her life. It was the mid-70s, and as her health improved, Brenda continued to search for her place in the music industry. With the arrival of the Bee Gees and Donna Summer, disco was poised to take over the charts.
Believe it or not, I experimented with disco, if you can believe that. And I thought, this is not for me. And I experimented with some rhythm and blues, which I love, which I was raised with. And just did some things and then came out with the opinion, hey, I'm who I am. I'm like Popeye. I am what I am, you know, and you're not going to change me a whole lot. So it was a fun experience, and it taught me a lot.
Brenda made the decision to return to her country and western roots. She reunited with her much-loved producer, Owen Bradley.
Owen always felt that I knew what I could sing and knew what I was capable of, although he knew what limits he could push me to, and always got the very best out of me, I must say.
In 1974, Brenda recorded Nobody Wins by Chris Christopherson. It was the start of yet another winning streak. She began to hit the top of the country charts with a string of gold record singles. Tell Me What It's Like gave her both a #1 record and a Grammy nomination. But even as Brenda was finding success on the charts, she was having a difficult time finding a manager who believed in her. She tried one manager after another until settling on a man who had been managing her life for years.
I was used to the family atmosphere along with the professional atmosphere, so I went to my husband and basically asked him to give up his thriving career as a builder and take over my business and help me. I look back on that now and find that to be pretty selfish.
But Ronnie filled those shoes expertly, and before long, Brenda's career was back on track. In the 1980s, the accolades and awards began to pour in. Brenda was inducted into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame. She was honored by a Brenda Lee Day in her hometown of Lithonia, Georgia, and was given the prestigious Governor's Award by the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. The evening was called A Tribute to a Legend.
Of all the audiences that I've ever faced, I think the one gathered here on September the 6th, 1984, is the one that will always be etched in my mind.
Brenda was honored by quite a few celebrities and other people that had meant a lot to her in her life. And it was I remember after that night, I said, Brenda, you know, tonight would be a great night to quit. Because it just didn't get much better than that.
The last standing ovation came as Brenda sang an emotional 18-song medley with her dear friend and mentor, Owen Bradley, at the piano. Over the years, Brenda remained true to the work ethic she developed as a child. She never stopped performing. She appeared on shows like Hee Haw and The Barbara Mandrell Show, displaying a talent for comedy.
She's got it in all aspects of it, you know, delivering copy, acting, the singing, the dancing, being funny.
I remember one time we went on a cruise she was performing on, and we had a French waiter, and he starts speaking in French, and there she goes, just having this 30-minute conversation. I said, "You speak French?" You know, and she just, she wouldn't ever tell you those type of things, but a very learned, smart lady.
Brenda also had a great influence on the younger generation of singers like Cyndi Lauper. She was surprised when Elton John brought her up on stage and told her that Crocodile Rock was inspired by her.
I was kind of an outsider in Nashville. When I met her, she was super nice to me and embraced me fully. And I just remembered feeling really, you know, welcomed by her and accepted by her, which was rare at that time for me.
In 1989, Brenda sang with Kitty Wells and Loretta Lynn on a song called Honky Tonk Angels, featured on K.D. Lang's album Shadowland. The album was produced by Owen Bradley and earned Brenda her 4th Grammy nomination. In the 1991 movie Home Alone, Brenda's mega hit Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree enjoyed a revival.
Rockin' around the Christmas tree, let the Christmas spirit ring. Later we'll have some pumpkin pie and we'll do.
It was one of the first songs that Brenda recorded with Owen Bradley back in 1958 and had become a Christmas classic.
Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree is the most festive song ever, and that was our mom, and how fun is that? I mean, we have that cranked up at Christmas time. Coupled with the fact that Christmas is Mother's favorite holiday because she's a huge child. She loves Christmas, the wrapping, the presents, the buying, the food, and she can't keep a secret.
There isn't anyone like Brenda. She just has all of these different textures, some of which I don't even know if she's found them yet, because there's this abundance. She's a bottomless pit of all this creativity.
In September of 1997, Brenda was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1998. Although the awards would give Brenda a great deal of joy, the final years of the 1990s would be among the hardest that Brenda would ever face. In 1998, after a lifetime of collaboration, Brenda's beloved producer, Owen Bradley, died.
I happened to call Mother at home during a typical work day, to say hello, how are you doing? And she had evidently just gotten off the phone with my father, who had told her, and she could not speak. She was crying so hysterically, and she said, she told me as best she could.
Brenda found her voice to grant Owen's last request. She sang "There Will Be Peace in the Valley" at his funeral, the signature song of Brenda's first mentor, Red Foley.
It's just astonishing what Owen Bradley and Brenda Lee accomplished.
Shortly after Owen Bradley's death, Brenda discovered she was having problems with her voice on stage. Shocked by a diagnosis of cysts on her vocal cords, she was now at risk of losing the voice that had given her everything. The doctor suggested immediate action, either surgery or therapy, but there was no guarantee that Brenda would come out of the surgery with her singing voice intact.
It was up to me whether to have surgery or not, but after he explained it to me and told me how invasive that it was and that I could probably rectify the problem with rest and all, I opted to take the year off. And I'm blessed to be able to do that.
Brenda took the year off, but the cyst did not respond as well as the doctors had hoped. She was warned once again to take it easy. Now, for the first time in her life, Brenda takes longer breaks between bookings. But when she is on the road performing, Brenda never complains and gives everything for her audience.
Brenda has more energy than most anybody I've ever known. We've spent 6 weeks of one-nighters in Japan. Never get to unpack our suitcase. She's the only one that doesn't complain. All the big, strong men are complaining, and Brenda's just, she has a lot of grit about her. And I mentioned that once. I've always been curious about it, and I mentioned it to her cousin in Georgia. And he said, well, if you had known her father, you would know why she's that way, because he was exactly the same way.
And though the little girl from Georgia did not have her father to share her life with, Brenda has built an international career with her family and loving husband beside her.
My husband has absolutely been my rock. He's been my anchor in my personal life as well as the last 21 years in my professional life.
Brenda Lee's career has spanned a half a century. After an unbelievable 50 years, Brenda continues to enthrall audiences with her voice.
The reason Brenda Lee was a giant rock star, a giant pop star, a giant country star, her talent knows no boundaries, none whatsoever.
She has charted in more categories than any other female singer and has sold over 100 million records.
There are a lot of people who have a gift like Brenda's and have an attitude that comes along, you know, with celebrity, but it never happened to her. She has always been that little girl that I met when we were 12 years old.
Ever since I've been little, I've had this great big booming voice that never fit my body. And people today still say it doesn't fit my body because I never grew much.
She was Little Miss Dynamite when she was a kid, and she's still Little Miss Dynamite. You want to see an entertainer? You want to see a real pro in action? Brenda Lee.
Brenda Lee wrote her autobiography with help from Robert Orman. Their songs were about love, heartbreak,